The series begins with a character who is taking her fish to a veterinarian named. They are friends, and he teases her for her excessive worry about her pets. He assures her that the fish is perfectly fine and tells her that the real problem is with her. Her fear of losing those she loves keeps increasing. She ignores his advice and leaves. When she returns home, she checks on her other animals, which include a turtle and a goat, and we learn that she also has a dog who prefers to stay on the streets and only visits her during meal times. Later, she receives a call from her friends. They all work together at an architectural firm named, and the caller reminds them not to be late because the new company manager will be announced that day. They speculate that the owner of the company, who seldom visits, will be present. Everything needs to be perfect. They also mention that the owner's son is with them in the company, and they are certain he will be the new manager. After ending the call to get ready, the scene shifts to a young man named, an architect just returned from Japan. He goes to his new house, which he recently bought but is entering for the first time. To his surprise, it turns out to be the same house that the main female character lives in. He finds the house in disarray, assumes someone has broken in and is living there. As he searches for the intruder, she emerges from the bathroom, mistakes him for a thief, and attempts to hit him with a stick. However, he is quicker, grabs her hand, and muffles her to prevent her from screaming. He tries to explain that he is the owner, but she doesn't give him a chance. She manages to free herself and hits him on the head, knocking him out. After a while, he regains consciousness, decides to call the police, and tells them what happened. While on the call, he's surprised by the arrival of a police officer at their home, called by the female character, who accused him of invading her home. They are taken to the police station, where each tells their side of the story. They both show their property deeds, and it is revealed that the person who sold the house to each of them omitted a crucial detail, that he only sold half the house to each. It was her first time buying a house, so she did not take precautions, whereas he was abroad and had his lawyer handle the paperwork, who failed to notice this important point. The police suggest that one of them should sell their share to the other, but both refuse. They decide to sue to dissolve the partnership, a process which can take anywhere from 3 months to 3 years. During this time, they are forced to live together in the same house. Elsewhere, we see two sisters who are the original owners of the house, having inherited it from their father. Each inherited half and decided to sell her portion without the other's knowledge. They misled the buyer by omitting this detail, fearing rejection. Upon learning what happened, they fear the reaction of the main characters. While discussing this, they are surprised by a knock at the door from the main characters, but are too afraid to answer. The two at the door assume no one is home and start arguing amongst themselves. One of them claims she repaired everything broken in the house and made many renovations, hence she cannot leave it no matter what. Eventually, both leave dejectedly. She then goes to her job and at the gate meets an old man accustomed to helping them solve problems and take revenge on anyone who bothers them, which is why they love him but also fear him. She enters the company and meets the secretary, who reassures her that the meeting to announce the new director has not started yet. She then greets her friends and another friend at the company. Shortly after, another character arrives, very agitated, signaling to an employee to come to his office. He reveals that his father refused to make him the manager because he wants him to be independent and not rely on his father's reputation and wealth. His father decided to bring in another young man as the manager. We learn that the company is recently facing a severe financial crisis and is on the verge of bankruptcy. The agitated man and the employee had been involved in money laundering, which is why they are afraid the new manager might discover what they did. On the other side, another friend gathers their friends in the office. It's revealed that he loves one of the female characters and plans to propose to her, asking for their help. He checks if everything is ready. At that moment, the main female character realizes she forgot the USB drive containing the video to be presented at the meeting. She remembers leaving it with a veterinarian, so she decides to call him to bring it quickly. Shortly after, the veterinarian arrives, visiting her at the company for the first time, and meets her friend who takes a liking to him. He has to leave immediately due to work. Afterwards, she sits with her female friends and tells them about her encounter with the male protagonist, and they sympathize greatly with her. Meanwhile, the male protagonist visits an old friend named, who is surprised to learn that he came from Japan to be the manager of the nearly bankrupt company. Despite being one of the top architects desired by many companies, he chose this company because it was nearly finished, which meant no one would interfere with his decisions, giving him full authority to do as he pleased. After that, he changes the subject and talks about his resolve not to leave the house, no matter what, mentioning the effort he put in to buy that particular house. He then meets with the company owner, asking for a year of autonomy without interference in his decisions. If by the end of the year they managed to turn a profit, great. If not, the company was anyway on the brink of bankruptcy. The owner reluctantly agrees. He offers to go with him to the company to introduce him to the employees, but he prefers to meet them on his own. Meanwhile, all the employees gather in the meeting room, waiting for the new manager. Seizing the moment, one of the employees proposes to another, and she accepts. At that moment, he arrives arrives, displeased with what they are doing at the company. He and the main female character are shocked to see each other again. He introduces himself to the employees and starts to lay out new rules for the company. The most important rule is to keep their personal lives separate from work. During work hours, they should only think about their jobs. He posts a paper highlighting this rule, making it clear he does not want any romantic relationships at work. He then announces that he wants to meet each employee individually, starting with a male employee who informs him that he plans to leave the company soon. He asks him to wait a bit until he is fully acquainted with everything in the company. Next, it's another employee's turn, who leaves his office in tears due to his harsh treatment. He then asks to meet another couple together, congratulates them on their engagement, but also informs them that one of them will be let go by the end of the month, as love within the company disrupts work. Both are shocked and leave his office devastated. The main female character sees them in this state and confronts him about his strict methods, but he diverts the conversation. He offers her a check as compensation for her share in the house, and also to cover her stay at a hotel until she finds another place. She refuses the offer and returns the check to him. Meanwhile, the engaged couple discuss their situation. The woman says she worked hard to reach her position and can't afford to quit her job, while the man fears his debts and feels he cannot leave his job either. They start arguing because neither wants to sacrifice for the other until she decides to end the relationship, throwing the engagement ring in his face. The main female character thinks he is acting like a tyrant and they need a plan to drive him out of the company. She forms a group with her friends to brainstorm together. After everyone leaves, she decides to gather them again at the company to reassure them that she won't rest until he is ousted so that their preferred manager can take over. They then spend the night at the company, drinking and celebrating this plan. Meanwhile, he is busy arranging his things in the house and decides to take over her room. He instructs the workers to move her belongings out and put his in, placing her things in the storage. Then he begins to wander around the house, reminiscing about memories in each space, noticing items still there from when he lived there as a child. Eventually, he decides to sleep, but is unable to due to the noise from the animals in the garden, prompting him to take a sleeping pill. At that time, another character arrives at the company after receiving several calls from them, only to find that everyone is drunk and not in their senses. He decides to take her home. Upon arrival, she is so intoxicated that she enters her room, now his, and falls asleep next to him without realizing it. The next day, they wake up and start arguing. She's upset when she sees what he has done to her room. He mocks her, defending his actions by saying he was just trying to pack her things so they would be ready when she leaves the house. Her anger escalates, and she starts breaking things in the house until she finds him about to enter a certain room. It becomes clear she doesn't like anyone entering that particular room, so she calms down and lets him be, hoping he won't open it. He then asks her to get ready to go to the lawyer to finalize the proceedings. On the other side, the sisters are surprised by a visit from their lawyer, who informs them that his lawyer called him, considering filing a compensation claim against one of them for not disclosing that she was selling only half of the house. The lawyer advises them to speak with them and try to find an amicable solution instead of going to court. They arrive at the company, and he scolds the employees upon learning that they had been staying up late celebrating at the company, demanding that it not happen again. Then she and another character go to a hotel owned by a man who is the new project owner for the company. She's surprised to find that he followed them there because the owner had contacted him wanting to meet him, so he wanted to meet her first to learn project details. He sends the other character back to the company and leaves them alone. They meet the hotel owner, who owns this and other hotels and wants to renovate them. He has specifically chosen their company because he has been following his work for a long time. She presents her ideas to the owner, who is impressed with her thought process. During their conversation, a waiter spills tea, and the owner decides to fire him, showing that he is a very strict person. He argues that how an employee handles small matters reflects their overall behavior, and thus he cannot overlook it. He asks for their opinions on the matter. He disagrees with the owner, arguing that if a manager fires every employee for a small mistake, then he would end up firing all his staff. The owner laughs, pleased by his boldness, the first time someone has opposed his opinion, and appreciates his courage. Subsequently, she has to ride back to the company with him. On the way, she asks him to stop so she can buy coffee, and he tells her his preferred type of coffee. She asks him to park the car so she can order his coffee with almond milk, as he prefers. At the coffee shop, she learns from an employee that they are out of almond milk. She asks the employee to use regular milk instead, confident that he won't notice the taste difference. However, after drinking it, he comments that the taste is strange, resembling regular milk. It turns out he has an allergy to dairy, and upon consuming it, he starts experiencing severe allergy symptoms, leading her to panic. Before she can explain, his condition worsens dramatically, prompting her to rush him to the hospital. After a while, he regains consciousness and finds her asleep next to him on a chair. The doctor informs him that his condition has stabilized. He also learns that she had fallen asleep from crying so much out of guilt. When she wakes up, up, she apologizes again, but he reassures her that he's fine now and they return to the company. Despite his recent ordeal, he decides to hold a meeting with the employees. He talks about the hotel owner, emphasizing that he is a very important client due to his extensive connections throughout Europe and must not be lost at any cost. He mentions that the client is paranoid, so they cannot afford any mistakes in front of him. After the meeting, she talks to him privately, taking responsibility for the breakup of the couple, but he believes the breakup happened because neither wanted to sacrifice for the other. Later, she meets with her friends, who sympathize with her more upon learning that her manager is also her housemate. They start gathering information about his dislikes to help her drive him out of the house. Returning home, she finds that he has changed the lock. Despite seeing her gesturing through the glass, he ignores her and turns up the music. She becomes enraged, especially when she discovers he had put her fish outside, careless of the cats that might harm it. Deciding to break the glass, she starts arguing with him. Overwhelmed by her loud voice, he takes her to his room and locks her in there, then calmly finishes his meal. After eating, he goes to unlock the door, surprised to find that she had gathered sheets and blankets to use them to jump from the balcony. Unfortunately, she jumps to the garden before he can reach her. He rushes down to check on her and finds that her shoulder is dislocated. He manages to reset it, but she remains in pain. Despite this, she adamantly refuses to go to the hospital. He gives her a muscle relaxant and upset with him. She takes more than the prescribed dose. He becomes worried about her. Later, she falls asleep from exhaustion and wakes up the next day on the couch. She feels embarrassed when he begins to recount what she did while under the influence of the medication, including hallucinating that he was the character Peter Pan, and his attempts to wake her up failed. After that, she slept on the couch, feeling embarrassed and denying that it happened. She is surprised to find that he made her soup after realizing she was still feeling unwell, and also replaced the glass she had broken. On the other side, we see two sisters who are out of money due to the compensation case. It turns out one of them spent all her money on cosmetic surgeries, and the other also spent all she had. We also learn that they sold most of their properties and spent both their own money and the funds from the house they are disputing with her and him, leaving only the house they currently live in. They start considering alternative solutions, and after much thought, decide to seek help from their father's friends, remembering one of his friend's sons who used to visit them and had a crush on one sister. When they check his profile, they discover he is involved with multiple women and retract their consideration. She and he prepare to go to their jobs, and he insists she ride with him without explaining why. She discovers he is taking her to a hospital to check on her arm. The doctor says her shoulder is fine, but decides to give her an injection, which scares her so much that she wants to run away. He holds her until she takes the injection and teases her about it all the way back. As they approach the company, he asks her to get out and take a taxi due to his fear of being seen together, as no one at work except her friends knows about their living situation. She refuses to tell him that she has already informed them, fearing his reaction. Meanwhile, the employees gather to think of a plan to drive him out. One employee suggests contacting their most difficult client to deal directly with him, remembering a particular employee everyone dislikes so much that another colleague dreads the days he has to meet her. The rest like the idea and are sure it will drive him out. She arrives at the company, and her friends take her to the bathroom to discuss. She is impressed when she learns of the plan and is excited about the outcome. They also give her items to use at home to annoy him, such as strong-smelling air fresheners and loud music, and even a personal perfume to make him hate her scent. She gets confused and uses the home air freshener on her body, resulting in a strong and lingering smell. As soon as she enters a meeting, everyone is bothered by her odor, but they are too embarrassed to tell her. Soon, the difficult client arrives, and he prepares to meet her, asking her to join him since she has known the client for a long time. We learn that this client visits them yearly to redo her house, always looking for something new and eye-catching. Surprisingly, he easily understands her, suggests things that please her so much that she gives him the authority to do anything he believes is right. The employees are frustrated when they learn that their plans have failed. He receives a call from his friend, who is worried about him due to his sudden disappearance. He reassures his friend and explains what happened. We learn that his father is in regular contact with the friend, who fears being asked about it, especially after news of his return from travel spread. He sharply tells his friend to respond with ignorance if asked. Meanwhile, two characters are going to meet a woman involved in a money laundering scheme they got entangled in, which helped them secure a tender by making other companies withdraw. She is a tough woman. They are afraid of her. They discover she still wants to exploit them for money laundering. She leaves without waiting for their reply. The two talk afterwards, feeling compelled to follow her orders. They start thinking about a project at their company with a large budget that would allow them to manipulate the funds to cover their dealings with her without raising suspicion. She is working with him on a new project, redesigning a villa for a client. They struggle with deciding what to do with one room, ultimately deciding to turn it into a room for the client's cats. Later, the sisters receive a call from him informing them that he and she will visit them that night to discuss the house issue. The sisters try to evade the meeting but fail and decide to invite them for dinner, hoping that a generous meal might help them gain forgiveness. She decides decides to consult with a veterinarian about the cat housing issue, and he visits her at the company. It's the second time he meets her friend, who still has a crush on him. The vet gives them advice on the cat housing and agrees to help them implement it, also ordering the necessary tools for them. On his way out, the vet meets him, realizes he's not as bad as others have said, but she remains unconvinced. They learn that another character is hosting a party at his house the next day and has invited them all. After work, she and he go to visit the sisters. Upon arrival, the sisters talk about unrelated topics and don't give them a chance to discuss the house. He tries to quiet them in various ways, stating he's there to talk about the house, but they keep changing the subject. She intervenes, dramatically raising a knife to make them listen, which causes one sister to faint out of fear. They consider taking her to the hospital, but the other sister assures them she will be fine. After they leave, it's revealed the fainted sister was pretending. Returning home, she sees a thief in the garden and tries to catch him, but it turns out to be the vet, who had come to give a goat an injection after trying unsuccessfully to reach her multiple times. He gets annoyed when he finds out she gave the house key to the vet. He tries to take the spare key from her, but she refuses. The next day, she wakes up to the annoying sound of him preparing breakfast, and then he insists on using the bathroom before her. She takes advantage of his distraction to enter a secret room that she keeps filled with many photos and does not allow anyone else to enter. Later, they meet at work, where all the employees are rushing to finish their tasks in time for the party later that evening. During this time, one of the employees places a file on another employee's desk related to their problem, and soon after, the latter talks to the staff, informing them that he's going to get ready for the party and asks her to come to the party with him to discuss further details with the host. By mistake, she takes the file from his desk among her things, and they are both shocked when they realize the file is missing. They conclude that it must be with her and prepare to do anything to retrieve it before she sees it. That evening, everyone meets at the party. She and another colleague start talking, and without her noticing, he steals her house key. Later, a man named arrives, an old friend of hers and the other colleague now working for the host. He asks her to dance, and while she is dancing with him, another character is in the host's office discussing work details. During the conversation, he notices a photo of a young woman on the host's desk and learns that she is his daughter, who has refused to speak to him for years, which visibly affects him. Meanwhile, he notices her dancing with the man and pulls her aside to express his discomfort, suggesting that the man seems to want something from her, but she dismisses his concerns. Later, she looks for a place to charge her phone in the villa, but can't find any free outlets, so she heads to the bedroom. To her shock, the man follows her into the room and attempts to assault her. Meanwhile, he is gathering employees to say goodbye to the host before they leave, but he learns from them that she went upstairs, so he goes to find her. He sees what is happening, pulls her out of the room, starts beating the man. Afterward, he decides to take her and leave when he sees her distraught. He wants to call the police, but she refuses, arguing that they have no evidence and that they assaulted the man, which he could use against them in a potential lawsuit. He agrees with her reasoning and takes her to leave, but first, he reassures her that he called the host to apologize for their abrupt departure. On the other side, another character leaves the party early and enters her house, beginning to search for the file until he finds it. On his way out, he discovers she has returned and is surprised to see him sitting with her in the garden. He leaves her briefly to fetch something from the car, and during his absence, another character seizes the opportunity to escape. However, he accidentally bumps into her, causing her to lose consciousness before she can see him. Despite his concern for her, he is forced to leave when he sees him approaching. He tries to catch him but fails and has to leave him to tend to her. He rushes her to the hospital, where the doctor assures him she is fine and can go home with him. When they return home, he asks her to sleep in the same room with him, setting up a mattress on the floor to ensure he can keep an eye on her in case of any complications. They challenge each other to a game of chess, decide to play together. Due to exhaustion, they fall asleep during the game. The next day, they are awakened by the doorbell ringing, with a worker delivering his belongings that have arrived from Japan. He begins placing them around the house. Meanwhile, she receives a call from her mother, who lives in another city and is very worried about her and wants to marry her off as soon as possible. She always changes the subject and ends the call quickly before her mother can see or hear him. Shortly after, the workers she ordered arrive and start moving her stuff from storage back into the house. She insists on taking her old room, but he refuses and asks her to choose another from the empty rooms. While trying to convince her about the other rooms, he finds his family's old piano and learns from her that the previous residents left it in the house, which moves him deeply. After much discussion, she chooses one of the empty rooms and asks the workers to set it up. Later, she calls her friends to tell them what happened. While they are talking, he calls her, and she has to end the call. They learn that the goat has opened one of the boxes in the garden and started eating his clothes. She admits she forgot to feed it, which annoys him, and he becomes even more upset when he learns she can't find her keys. He deduces that the thief must have found the key, which is why he was able to enter the house. Meanwhile, the sisters are afraid that she and he might want to meet them again and start thinking of an alternative plan. After much thought, they conclude that if she and he fall in love, they might agree to live in the same house, and then all their problems would be solved, and they wouldn't think of filing filing a complaint. The sisters decide to make them a cake and bring it to them, trying over time to bring them closer together. They decide to leave the sweets at the door and walk away because of their fear. She and he find out from the car that the sisters sent the cake, trying to apologize indirectly for what happened. The two decide to have breakfast together since it is their day off. However, shortly after, workers arrive to change the door lock, which he had arranged through the internet, asking them to come as soon as possible due to his fear that the thief might return. It turns out there are two workers, not one. They demand a large sum, which he reluctantly pays. Just after they leave, she and he discover that their laptops are missing. They conclude that the workers were thieves and quickly go to the police station to report the incident. There, they are transferred from one department to another, with each officer asking them for details about the incident. Eventually, a man enters and starts asking them the same questions, but after they finish their story, they discover he is just the cafeteria worker. Curious about their story, he loses his temper and starts beating the cafeteria worker, leading to their detention. Each blames the other for their predicament. Later, she is called to make a phone call to someone who can help them. He asks her to use his phone to call his lawyer named Yildirim. She follows the instructions, but the officer insists on retrieving the number himself and making the call for her. She talks to the lawyer and asks him to come to the station, ending the call before he can respond. Soon, they are surprised when Mr. Yildirim, the hotel chain manager, shows up. It turns out the officer called the wrong Yildirim. He agrees to vouch for them, but then decides he will no longer work with them. She feels guilty, while he is willing to do anything to salvage the situation, especially since Yildirim is one of their most important clients. He asks for a 2-day grace period, promising that he will convince him to resume working with them. When they return home, they realize they both forgot to take the key when they went to the station and have no choice but to break in. She notices a cat inside the house about to eat her fish, blaming him for the situation, as the cat must have entered through an open window. Distraught over the safety of her fish, he feels guilty and decides to break the window quickly. She manages to save her fish. At the end of the day, she thanks him for everything he has done. The next day, she decides to prepare breakfast for him to thank him for all his help. When she looks for him, she discovers he has already left, which surprises her because it is still too early for work. At this time, he is meeting with Alara, Mr. Yildirim's daughter, after making a significant effort to find her and learn everything about her. He is honest with her from the start, explaining that he is about to lose his job with Mr. Yildirim and is therefore willing to do anything to save this situation. The two decide to have breakfast together since it's their day off. In the evening, one character asks another to bring his camera to a specific location. We learn that two characters are friends, and therefore he knows that the other is secretly dating a woman. He goes to her house when he learns that his friend is there and asks another friend to take pictures of them together on the balcony. Initially, the friend refuses, but he reminds him that he had given him a higher salary than the other employees because he knew about his debts, which embarrasses him into agreeing. The next day, the photos arrive, and it turns out that he plans to deliver them to the other man himself to force him to start working with them again. However, he is afraid to do it himself, so he gathers a few colleagues and asks them to deliver the envelope to the other man without revealing its contents, lying that it contains a gift that will make him return to work with them. She blames herself for the problem and decides to take responsibility, breaking the explicit orders given multiple times by another character not to intervene. She decides to go to the company, but they refuse her entry due to lack of an appointment, and a security officer forces her out. Soon after, she discovers that her friends have come to check on her, and one of them helps them sneak in through the back door. They take advantage of the employees' lunchtime to creep around until they hear someone approaching and hide in a particular office. An employee enters but leaves without seeing them, locking the door behind her. It turns out to be the archive room, and they fear being seen inside might lead to accusations of stealing company secrets. One of them starts panicking due to claustrophobia and begins screaming. At this moment, the hotel manager happens to pass by and hears them, ordering the employee to open the door. At the same time, another character arrives, bringing the manager's daughter so she can discuss her conditions for reconciliation with her father. Another friend arrives, feeling guilty after making her go alone without considering the problems she might face. The manager takes the envelope and insists on calling the police, while another character is frustrated that they disobeyed his orders. He tries to calm the manager but fails. His daughter, annoyed by her father's demeanor, decides to leave, prompting the manager to postpone everything to sit down with her. She insists that another character be present during their conversation, and the manager reluctantly agrees. Meanwhile, he orders another friend to take the girls back to the office, but they insist on staying outside the company to know what happened. They conclude that he brought the manager's daughter to reconcile with her father, thereby ensuring he would resume working with them, and their intervention messed everything up. They feel guilty, and while they are discussing, they are surprised by the entrance of someone pretending to be a regular customer in the place. She had been sitting nearby and heard their conversation and begins to give them advice about their work and relationship with the manager. They are impressed by her character and allow her to join them, and everyone likes her except for one character who knows she is indirectly threatening him. Therefore, he tries to end the gathering quickly and suggests to the ladies that they should return to the office, which they agree to, except for one who insists on waiting for them. He is worried about her staying with the threatening woman, but he has to leave. On the other side, another character is presenting her demands to her father, which include an orphanage, a care home for women, and an arts center for children, all to be provided for free. She also stipulates that he should not advertise these charitable projects. In return, she agrees to have lunch with him twice a year. He is forced to agree and is prepared to do anything for her forgiveness. Afterward, she decides to wait outside until they finish discussing work. He addresses another character, disapproving of his lenient approach with the employees. Shortly after, two characters are seen leaving the company, prompting her to follow them in a taxi. She discovers they are going to dine at a large restaurant. When she tries to follow them inside, she is refused entry by an employee due to not having a reservation, insistent on finding out how their meeting with the manager goes. Especially after sending several messages to him without response, she decides to enter the restaurant through the kitchen. Disguised as a waiter, she enters and starts serving tables, trying to get close to their table to overhear them. She learns that the manager has agreed to resume working with them. He speaks about his employees, saying they mess up everything he does and takes part of the blame for what happened. Eventually, the manager of the place notices her, forcing her to flee. She returns to the company and tells her friends about what happened. Still feeling guilty, she decides to submit her resignation, fearing that he might fire her friends. When he arrives at the company, he reassures everyone that the manager will continue working with them. However, he is still upset about what happened and goes into his office, leaving the employees relieved except for one, who deduces that the manager hasn't opened the envelope since he agreed to continue working with them. He wants to enter the company to steal the envelope before anyone sees it. Meanwhile, she follows him into his office and presents her resignation, asking him to accept it and forgive her friends. However, he ignores her plea and summons her friends for a discussion with all three of them. He asks them if they opened the envelope, but they say that they trusted the words of one character and didn't think to open it. Later, it's revealed that the envelope is currently with another character who has opened it and knows its contents, which is why he is upset. He requests to meet the first character, but learns he is not present at the company. He then addresses the three women, telling them that they indeed made a mistake, and the solution is for them to stay at the company and correct their error, not to run away and resign. He tears up the resignation letter and orders them to return to their work. At that time, the first character starts looking for someone to steal the file from the company, and he thinks of another person, but he learns that a mentor had beaten him after finding out what he did to one of the women. They discover that this person is now in the hospital, so they go there and learn that the mentor took his company access card. The first character decides to enter the company himself to retrieve the file. He arrives there after the employees have left, wearing a cap so no one would recognize him and think he is an employee returning for something he forgot. After a struggle, he reaches the manager's office but cannot find the envelope. On the other side, we see one of the women returning home, discovering that another character has emptied the room she uses for storage, planning to turn it into an office. She is upset that he moved her things to the garden without her permission, but decides to keep calm to avoid escalating their problems. It turns out she brought him a t-shirt as a gift to replace the one the goat ruined. He accepts it and thanks her, but he is still upset about her actions. As soon as he brings up work, she interrupts him, reminding him of their most important rule. They agreed to separate work issues from their living arrangements. He is forced to drop the subject. They then start arguing over trivial details, even arguing about who should cook their food first. After some struggle, they decide to share the kitchen. While they are eating, two sisters arrive, bringing sweets and gifts. Whenever the house is mentioned, they change the subject. The four of them sit down to talk, and the sisters present the gifts they brought, giving her a new dress and insisting she try it on. Then they ask the man to make them tea. Taking advantage of the moment they are alone, they call a worker they had arranged with to cut the house's electricity when they call him. This is revealed to be part of their plan to create a more romantic atmosphere to help the two characters grow closer. On the other side, we see Marvy, who goes out to meet Bori. We learn that they have gotten back together, but have decided to keep it a secret from all their friends due to their fear that the matter might reach Demir, who might fire one of them. Marvy loves him and knows he loves her, but she is still afraid for her job. Meanwhile, the sisters leave Selin and Demir and walk away. During this time, Selin and Demir sit down to talk. They light candles because the electricity is still out, and Demir uses this opportunity to talk to her about the envelope from Borak. Selin is surprised to learn that the envelope is with him. Demir, on the other hand, is surprised by Selin's trust in Borak to the extent that he suspects something might be going on between them. All the employees suspect that they might have feelings for each other due to their their overly trusting relationship, but Selin denies this, saying she trusts him because he has been her friend for a long time, to the extent that she refuses to open the envelope. While arguing with Demir, Selin accidentally knocks over a candle, burning his hand. She apologizes and runs to get ointment for him, mentioning that she uses this ointment on her animals and it always helps them heal quickly. She begins to tell him about her childhood, explaining she was an only child and considered her animals as her friends and siblings. Selin insists on wrapping his hand, and afterwards Demir goes to his room, leaving the envelope out, perhaps hoping she might open it. He watches her from the balcony as she talks to herself, hesitating whether to open it or not, until she decides not to. The next morning, Demir discovers that his hand has completely healed. When he goes downstairs, he finds Selin asleep in the garden. He wakes her and offers her to sleep a bit more until work time. He then calls Borak, asking to meet him at the company later. On the other side, Ida goes to meet Ibo, after learning that the cat house supplies have arrived at his place, and it turns out he also has feelings for her. The two spend the day together. Borak reaches the company, where Demir confronts him with the photos. We learn that Demir suspected Borak had entangled them in a new problem, so he took advantage of Yildirim's distraction with his daughter Ilara and switched the envelope with another one he had, which contains research proving that charitable organizations can be recognized easily without advertisements to support Ilara's ideas. In the present, Borak refuses to say who took the photos and decides to take responsibility alone, defending himself by saying he was ready to do anything to save the company and that this wasn't extortion or anything similar. Demir reminds him that he is the manager with higher authority and decides to give him leave until he can decide if he wants to continue with them, under the condition that if he does continue, he must understand his limits well. On the other side, we see the teacher Morim going to visit Selin to fix an electrical fault. There, he encounters Lily and Firoza in the garden. We learn that they were checking if their plan had worked, but they are scared of Morim. Lily pulls out a stun gun and shocks him, and then they flee. At that time, Selin comes out of the house and sees Morim in this condition, but he reassures her that he is okay. In a short time, he manages to fix the fault, and Selin thanks him profusely. Borak arrives, coming to take Selin to work, and on the way, he tells her that Demir wants to fire him. Borak is devastated, especially when he recalls the sacrifices he has made for the company. Out of nervousness, he increases the speed of the car unconsciously. Selin starts to fear for her safety and forces him to stop the car so she can get out. Borak tells her that he has decided to quit his job, but Selin ignores his words and stops a taxi to go to the company. Meanwhile, Borak receives a call from Isen, who seems to know everything that has happened, leading Borak to suspect that she is spying on them at the company or that there is a spy feeding her information. Isen threatens to harm his father and mother if he leaves the company before carrying out her demands, forcing Borak to retract his decision to quit. Selin reaches the company, where Ilara is present, and it turns out she has decided that their company will be responsible for designing the shelters. Whenever Selin tries to give her opinion, Ilara embarrasses her, annoyed at her for arriving late to the meeting and also because of the events at the company. Shortly thereafter, we see Selin overwhelmed with work after Demir has given her additional responsibilities. She asks Ida to help them, and they need Marvi's help, but Bori lies, saying she has a doctor's appointment and that he will go with her. It turns out he had arranged to go out with her at this time and doesn't want the outing to be ruined. When they leave, Marvi feels guilty for hiding their relationship from her friends and begins to have a panic attack. Bori decides to cancel their plans and takes her to their usual cafe, then calls Selin and Ida to join them there. Meanwhile, Borak goes to meet Demir and tells him he intends to continue working at the company. He lies, saying he has realized his mistakes and decided to come back to prove his loyalty to the company. Demir agrees on the condition that he maintains a distance from the employees, especially Selin. Borak reluctantly agrees. Shortly after, we see all the employees gathered in the cafe, beginning to think of an alternate plan to get rid of Demir. Marvi and Ida think they could bring in someone to pretend to be a client and train him on what to do, with the primary goal of annoying Demir. They start thinking of someone who could do this, but Selin is afraid they might get caught. She suggests that they focus on improving their work in the coming period so as not to arouse suspicion and think of another plan later. After much discussion, they decide to do both things at the same time. Borak says he knows someone who could undertake the task, hinting at Isan. On the other side, Ibo arrives at the company, planning to meet Ida. Learning they are at the cafe, he decides to join them there. By chance, he encounters Demir leaving the company and suggests they all go together to get better acquainted. Demir agrees. They head to the cafe. There, Demir sees them gathered and talking about a plan to annoy the Panther. When he asks whom they mean, everyone is startled and no one can respond to him.